Okay, welcome everyone. This is our second session of the 2025 Winter Virtual Club Development Series. I'm Jocelyn Poirier. I'm the manager of rugby development at Rugby Ontario. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm trying to be better at remembering to share that in my introductions. Before we get into tonight's session, just a quick reminder to keep your microphones muted while you're listening. And then you can use the chat for questions and comments. Add those as they come. I'll kind of monitor that and can screen, and Jen will be able to see those as well. We encourage you to leave your cameras on so we know who we're talking to, we can see you. But just a reminder again that we're recording this. It'll be available to rewatch later for those who've missed it. I'm coming to you from Gananoque, Ontario, the traditional territory of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee people, land covered by the Crawford Purchase of 1783. And Rugby Ontario's member clubs and all of you are situated on traditional Indigenous territories across the province. I invite you all to pause and reflect for a moment on our privilege to work, learn, and play on these lands, and share some gratitude to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who have been and continue to be caretakers of the lands. If you would like to acknowledge the lands that you are on, please feel free to do so in the chat. And I'm going to pull up the chat as well. I'll share a link here with some info about the Diversity in Sports conference that's coming up May 2nd to 4th in Mississauga. It's run by the Inclusion in Canada Sports Network, ICSN. They launched this year their Playfair Toolkit, which is also available for free. I'll put that link in our chat as well. And that's been something they've been running with their Playfair Toolkit. They've run a Lunch and Learn series this year that a number of our staff members have been attending, which has been a really great learning opportunity for us. So if you're looking for resources or opportunities to learn more in this space, I would encourage you to check out those links as well. Okay. With that, I will introduce our speaker tonight. So Jennifer Bennett is a passionate and dynamic sport leader with a wealth of experience in the sport industry. She's the Director of Safe Sport and Integrity at Tennis Canada, responsible for delivering on Tennis Canada's commitment to create a safe, positive, and inclusive environment for the tennis community at every level of the sport. Her past work experience includes leadership roles in the sport management program at Humber College, sport and recreation branch of the Government of Ontario, at OFSA and Ontario Volleyball. She also served as chef de mission for Team Ontario at the 2017 and 2019 Canada Games, and continued to support the team in a leadership role through 2022. On top of all of that, like you, she is a community sport volunteer with her local community sport organizations, including the North Toronto Soccer Club. So Jen, we thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I will pass it over to you once you're set up there.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. I just want to double check. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, and you can see the slides. I, as part of my job and my various roles, do many presentations, and I have never had as much technology issues as I have today. So thanks everyone for their patience, and let's hope that we don't hit any more snags, because as Jocelyn was doing that wonderful introduction, my computer totally shut down. But we're here, we're back, and thanks for having me. I will highlight that that Diversity in Sport conference. One of the messages that I hope to share with all of you is just, we don't know what we don't know, and really our drive to understand how the world is evolving, how cultures are evolving, how sport is evolving is really a critical tool in creating a positive rugby experience for everyone in a safe and inclusive environment. So I would really encourage you to attend that event, because it is a signature event in Ontario, and the group organizing it is awesome. So anyways, I'll dig right into it. My name, as Jocelyn has said, is Jen Bennett, and I am the Director of Safe Sport currently at Tennis Canada. And why is a tennis person coming to talk to you today and share her experience? Also, as for my introduction, I'm also a sport fan, a sport professional, and a sport parent, and really am committed to sharing my experience, my perspective, and my learnings with all of you. And so I'd really like to thank Jocelyn and John for having me today to share our perspective that will help lead into all of the great work that Rugby Ontario and Rugby Canada is doing to ensure that your sport remains and continues to become more and more safe and inclusive. This is meant to be a conversation, and so I know that the chat is being monitored, and please feel free to interrupt at any point in time if you have questions or you would like to seek clarification. I will go through a number of pieces. We'll cover an introduction. We will talk about what it means to what the challenges are in the environment and the work that you all are doing. We're going to talk about some issues and trends. I'm going to dig into the Ontario Coaches Report, and I have included some links that I will share this presentation at the end, and some really important links for you to consider. And if you haven't read through the Ontario Coaches Report, it's got some really great insights around the coaching landscape in Ontario and some considerations moving forward for your environment. Also, what to do. So I'm going to share lots of stats and information with you, and then what do you do with all of this information? And I've really tried to keep it simple and practical and really have a conversation around that. And we'll get to questions and discussions at the end. So I have, just a little, I'm going to try to keep it to a little under an hour because I know there's someone sharing information after me, but definitely we can, get through as much of the information as we can, being mindful of time and hopefully have some great discussion at the end. So one thing before we really get started, it's important for me to set the stage. And I really like to start all of my sessions with this so that everyone understands that I really want you all to participate as you feel comfortable. In some cases, those of you who are in the room or those of you who are listening to this, come from personal experience either within creating safe spaces or working to develop safe spaces, or you come from environments where you've experienced some of the behaviors that we're going to talk to today. So please know that I'd love you to encourage to participate, but if you want to just sit back and listen and take in the information, that's also amazing. Thank you for showing up and thank you for your commitment to being here. This is designated a bit as a working session. I want to have that conversation and give you some tools and some things to consider. I also want to set a brave space. So if you do put your hand up, if you do want to ask a question, please know that it's free of judgment. And everyone, as I said, is coming at this from a different level of awareness, of understanding and experience. And it is important in the work that we're doing that to acknowledge that people have various levels of experience. And it's about a dialogue and not debate. Again, when we encourage people to ask tough questions or to ask vulnerable questions, we want to know that the intention is positive. And that's really, really critical, is that someone may ask a question that you might perceive to be unevolved or challenging or challenges your personal beliefs, and that's okay. We want everyone to assume that we're here to learn, we're here to grow, we're here to listen, and here to leave here as better sport professionals, club leaders, coaches, and everyone involved in making rugby a better place. And last but not least, we all have a role to play. So please take this information as you see fit, use it to better or to enhance your environment, and always know that I'm here to support you if you want to continue the conversation at a later time. So to start, what is sport safety? So we talk about safe sport, we talk about sport safety, we talk about all of these terms and you see all this stuff on the news. So what is it that we're trying to do when we talk about creating a safe sport or a safe sport safety environment? And it really, at the end of the day, involves creating safe, positive, and inclusive environments. We're looking to ensure that everyone reaches their potential without fear of bullying, harassment, or abuse. And if one of those behaviors occurs, there is an opportunity to hold those individuals accountable. And the first thing that I want to highlight when we talk about, okay, what does this mean in practical terms? Many of you exist in clubs or have policies at your clubs or have participated in sport where they talk about a zero tolerance policy. How many of you have heard that term or experienced that term? I know it's really hard to engage because you're online, but think about that term. And often people hear that term and they say, okay, we have zero tolerance for bullying, harassment, or abuse. The reality of zero tolerance isn't mean that it's you're in or you're out. You commit one act and you're out. And that's one of the kind of myths that I'm constantly trying to debunk is it's okay to hold people accountable and meet people where they're at to change their behavior, to enlighten their perspective without completely banning them from your sport or from your experience. And so when we talk about creating environments where everyone can reach the potential without fear of bullying, harassment, or abuse, it's really about creating those environments where if someone crosses a line, if someone shares a perspective that challenges the values, the beliefs, the expectations set within your organization, that there's a pathway to change that behavior, to change that perspective and align it with the values and the policies within your clubs. We want to ensure that everyone is safe, supported, and strengthened through our sport. We know that by creating these environments where people are safe and supported, we actually unlock their optimal performance. And again, another myth that we often see is, and a bit of old school coaching really is we need to break a person down and rebuild them as the athlete that we think they should be and in the environment that we think they should have. And all of the research now shows that that is completely detrimental and a coaching practice that is no longer acceptable. And in order to create the optimal environment, it really is about creating that safe, supported, and environment where we're strengthening and building the athletes up from their own personal perspective based on who they are. And when we do that, we really focus on not only physical, but psychological safety. And when that underpins the environment that you are creating for your athletes, you will actually not only unlock their full potential, but you will unlock their love and their joy and their participation in your sport for life. And again, I shouldn't say this because we're being recorded, but I often say, our sports safety department at Tennis Canada really is the department of positive tennis experiences. And we want to make sure, and I know that, the staff at Rugby Ontario and the staff at Rugby Canada that's working on these files really believe that when we can create this environment, we will keep these individuals involved in our sport forever. And really, at the end of the day, when we look at all of you in this room, all of you listening to this webinar, you're really here for that reason, right? You love this sport and you want everyone that picks up a rugby ball, steps on the rugby pitch to have that experience that keeps them engaged in your sport for life, because that will enhance your athlete continuum. It'll help you develop lifelong volunteers, coaches, and people that want to give back to the sport. And that's really what we're trying to do when we talk about a safe sport environment, especially at this provincial community sport level. Do we have any questions? Jocelyn, I can't see the chat. So if someone has a question, I can see you. So I'll just see you come off mute and okay, perfect. Great. So let's talk about psychological safety, because everyone knows, I'm going to assume that everyone knows what we mean by physical safety, right? We talk about concussion, we talk about injury prevention, we talk about return to play protocols. And as coaches and administrators and club leaders, we really have spent a lot of time understanding what that means. Where we're seeing emerging work occurring is in this concept of psychological safety. And it really is an environment where an individual feels themselves. They feel the ability to take risks, to express ideas, to ask questions, be themselves, and acknowledge mistakes. And when we create those environments, those individuals can be themselves and they can unlock and explore the skills that you're showing them without any fear about negative consequences. And we're going to talk about those negative consequences in a little bit. And it's about creating a culture that promotes a sense of trust and respect, where individuals don't feel judged and can be their authentic self. And I know in the work that I do at the national level, it really is about we run an independent third party process for violations of our code of conduct and the Universal Code of Conduct to address and prevent maltreatment in sport in Canada. And I often say through my experience that if we can create environments where that are founded in communication, transparency, and trust, we will actually prevent the escalation of the majority of issues that end up with an independent third party or a violation of a code of conduct. And that's really a critical takeaway for all of you that are working or that are participating online on this webinar today, because you are the foundation for, starting that first experience. And so if you can create environments where your athletes, where your coaches, where your volunteers feel safe to be themselves and feel comfortable putting their hand up to not only ask questions and seek clarification, but also to say, I don't feel comfortable, or I'm not sure, I'm okay with what's happening. The earlier we build those skills within those athletes in our system, the deeper that skill becomes when they get into the high performance environment and the more engaged they become. And it really is the kind of environment where people feel able to put themselves out there, and that's what really unlocks their potential. And so it's no longer about you creating the athlete that you envision based on your personal experience. It's about understanding who those athletes are, understanding their motivation for participating in your sport, and then developing an environment that helps to encourage them to be themselves and reach their full potential. So overall, when we talk about a safe sport environment, in addition to that psychological and physical safety, we really look at the fact that it's safe, equitable, inclusive. So if we look at that, the professional development opportunity that Jocelyn talked about at the start, the more we learn to understand the diverse perspective, the more inclusive the environment is that we're going to create. It promotes strength and resilience and self-confidence within the athletes, that autonomy and that sense of purpose that we know unlocks potential. It also encourages fair and meaningful competition. When we are engaging in values-based sport and individuals understand they're part of the bigger picture, it will translate into less of those field of play related issues and issues with our officials. It ensures respect, and again, building on that, it ensures respect for our opponents, our officials, and those organizing, right? Think about those athletes that leave a practice and say, thanks, coach. Think about those athletes and those parents that, don't attack our administrators, don't attack our volunteers, don't attack our coaches. They ask questions, they provide feedback in respectful manners. Those are all byproducts of a safe and inclusive environment. And again, as we've talked about, it allows for growth and development. And from a coach protection perspective, it's open and observable. And I'm going to assume that all of you understand the rule of two, understand the components of the rule of two, and understand the importance of ensuring that you are never engaging one-to-one with an athlete in an environment that is not open, observable, and justifiable. And that really is a critical piece within our safe sport environment. And overall, it's positive and fun because, again, we know that today's athlete engages and performs better when they're having fun. We know that, many of you are probably aware of research that talks about what drives women and girls to participate in sport. And it really is about relationships first, skill development, and then competition. And the emerging research coming out of the pandemic is it's not just women and girls that excel in that environment. All of the emerging research coming out of the pandemic is saying that it's no longer, even for males, it's no longer about that competitive environment and that competitive experience. Everyone is happier and more engaged and better performers when they have better relationships on and off the field with their teammates, with their coaches, and with their club. So what are the challenges? It's really great to say that's what we do, that's how we create that positive environment. That's what it is. But the reality is, for all of you who are boots on the ground, who are living this every single day, there's a number of challenges. There's policy versus practice. And within the rugby system, there are requirements for clubs to have policies that set the expectations for the club, that standardize behaviors, that outline, code of ethics, code of conduct, all of those things that we have to help govern behavior. A lot of the time, what we find is, even, across the system, from the national all the way to the club environment, those policies often sit on a website and are only brought out when issues occur. And what I want you to understand is, it's great to have these policies. It's so critical for you to have these policies. But unless you are taking those policies off the page and bringing them to life in every single thing you do as an organization, they are a waste of time and a waste of effort. And what that means is, that means that if you have a code of conduct, if you have required training within your club environment, you have to start bringing that into your environment on a daily basis through preseason meetings, for reinforcing the expectations with parents, with players, and with everyone in your system. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But I understand that you're all challenged within capacity. Many of your clubs are volunteer run. And so don't have too many policies. Have those key policies that are required within your membership structure, but also those key policies that are going to help guide you when challenges occur. The second one is, again, just like I started here today, everyone is coming to your environment with various levels of baseline knowledge and awareness. Many people make assumptions that they understand what is expected within the sport. Many people make assumptions around what is expected in the environment and what a high performance environment looks like. A critical piece in your communication efforts with your membership is to ensure that they understand what positive behavior looks like and what bad behavior looks like, as well as what the process is when someone crosses a line. And all too often, again, going back to the first point, those policies live on a website and no one even knows that they exist, or no one even knows that they have signed them as part of your registration. And I know many of you have experienced this with Rowan's Law and some of the other requirements within the sports system. Many people just check the box. Yes, I have read the linked policy. Yes, I have participated in whatever that online training is, but are they simply clicking through to get to the end result? Or are you providing them with enhanced baseline information and knowledge? And I'm going to talk about practical ways that you can do that shortly. The other piece is understanding that every single club and every single team has various levels of capacity. Some of you are 100% volunteer run. Some of you are, have some paid staff or may have full-time coaches. But everyone is different. And everyone also has various levels of stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I'm talking about, or participants, I'm talking about coaches, players, parents, everyone involved in your club ecosystem. The engagement is at various levels. In some cases, your parents might be very heavily involved in your athletes and your team, with your athletes and your teams. In other cases, you might have an environment where the parents are dropping players off and you never see them again unless something goes wrong, or unless they have a bone to pick or something to say to one of many or any of you. And so understanding that that's just the reality of what we do. And so where can you take initiative to engage those individuals to ensure you share your baseline expectations, to build that knowledge and awareness and make them aware of the policies and the practices that are there. And last but not least, what is the role that culture plays within your organization? And culture is a really popular, overused, and big term. But when we talk about culture, it's really about, what are those key expectations that you have around how your club environment operates, and what that looks like from a a behavior perspective and an expectation perspective. And you really have to understand that your role as coaches, as club leaders, is to set that culture within your club, and should be entrenched in the values that you have within your club to develop that next generation of player and keep people engaged in your sport. So, quick question to start the conversation. When we think about how you were coached, I want you to just take a second and think about how you were coached. Not only, and most of you have probably grown up playing rugby, many of you have played other sports, many of you have had, various levels of sport experience. Think about those coaches that have had a positive experience within your environment and those coaches that have a negative experience in your environment. And think about those coaches that unlocked your performance. And I want you to think about whether or not the behaviors that you experience as a player, those behaviors that you witness, those techniques to unlock potential, that ability for that coach to motivate those athletes, are all of those behaviors acceptable in today's society? And the answer may be yes, and the answer may be no. But what you have to understand is the majority of coaches, at their very foundation, coach the way that they were coached. And when you think about coaching the way that you were coached, in many cases, although you may have turned out and became that high level athlete, but in some case, and you might have responded to that level of coaching or that type of technique or that type of behavior or that type of motivator. But in today's society, the expectations and the way in which we coach athletes are very, very different. So what we have to do as a system, and the reason that Jocelyn has asked me to be here today, is to talk to you about how we have evolved as a sports system as a reaction to what we have seen and the behaviors we have seen that have been detrimental to the sports system. And we have seen at a very high level, you have all seen on TV and on the news, major issues that have happened in the Canadian sports system where we have lost the public trust. And we have lost the public trust because coaches, players, behaviors have crossed often at times in various sports into that criminal environment. And what we've seen on TV and through, some of the professional sport environments is an acceptance that it's okay to behave this way across the entire sports system. And I'll use tennis because that's where I live and that's my most comfortable space as the number one example. We actually have to make a conscious effort. If you watch tennis, or even if you don't watch tennis, you've probably seen many, many players tossing their rackets, arguing with officials at the professional level, engaging in behaviors where they're challenging the crowd and the spectators, and behaviors that really are not acceptable in any other coaching environment or any other competition environment. So we have to make a conscious effort at our junior nationals to talk to players about the fact that, slamming their racket, yelling out in the middle of the court is not an acceptable behavior because it doesn't reflect the culture and the values within our Tennis Canada environment. So we actually have to find this balance between what we call cultural conditioning and normalized behaviors and land where we actually know we need to go as a sport. So when I ask you to think about, are these behaviors, techniques, and motivators that you've either witnessed or experienced throughout your career okay or unacceptable in this current environment? So when we talk about cultural conditioning, we really talk about the fact that within sport, and this is true both in cultural conditioning and normalized behavior. So cultural conditioning really looks like within the culture of the environment, are there behaviors that are acceptable? When we normalize these unacceptable behaviors as just, oh, that's a rugby player, or oh, that's a hockey player, oh, that's a soccer player, and we dismiss what could be antisocial behaviors or behaviors that contradict the values within our organization. We actually perpetuate a problem that leads to code of conduct infractions and problems within our environment that cause people to drop out or have that negative sporting experience. So, as club leaders, you have to think about when that behavior may occur. And what this looks like in everyday life is hazing. And we're going to look at hazing in a second. And many of you think, oh, hazing, we don't do that anymore. The most recent data out of the Coaches Association of Ontario coaching report is that hazing still occurs at an alarming rate, especially at the community sport level. We're going to look at that. It's also around rookie nights. And even the term rookie is not really acceptable anymore in the sport environment because it denotes an environment where someone can no longer be their authentic self and may have to participate in behaviors that often, from a historical perspective, cross a line. I understand that many of you might challenge this. And when I talk about the fact that, this is a respectful environment, this might be these statements and this information that I'm sharing might be something that makes you think, well, of course, this is how you create a team. Oh, of course, this is how you, create those group dynamics that create wonderful, engaging teams. I'm here today to tell you that these environments do not create those lasting positive experiences and unlock that team dynamic that's going to build those championship teams. It's actually going to erode at the trust and the respect and the transparency within a team that will lead to poor performance and lack of participation and engagement within your athletes. Another one is exercise as punishment. And again, we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail a little later. We also see a lot of athlete to athlete abuse. And this happened recently in hockey, where there was a situation, and I don't know how many of you saw it, where there was a situation in Ontario where there was a group of athletes on a hockey team where, they made threats to kill a teammate that was on that group chat. That information, that type of behavior must be called out immediately and must be stopped, and is a growing and concerning trend around sport safety issues that we're seeing at the community level. Language and tone used to toughen athletes up, again, contradicts the environment that we're trying to create that is open and inclusive and considers the authentic athlete and the ability for an individual to be their authentic self. They may not respond, and we know the research shows that they do not respond to this environment. Challenging parent-coach relationships. I could do an entire hour, 5 hours on engaging positive parent-coach relationships. I know it is a big challenge. I have some suggestions for you at the end, but it is something that we need to look at and spend a lot of time on. But what you have to remember is, in this safe sport environment, because of everything you've seen in hockey, in soccer, in rugby, in swimming, in every single sport, gymnastics in this country, we have seen the pendulum swing, right? We've seen these behaviors get so extreme and the outcomes of these behaviors become so extreme that we've had to take a super, super conservative approach to everything that we're doing. And what's actually happened, and what I'm seeing every single day, is it's taken away our coach voice. Coaches are more vulnerable than they've ever been in this world. And don't think that the people in my roles don't understand that. And that's why, part of the reason why I'm here to talk to all of you today. We need to empower the coach's voice to not only manage the relationships with parents, but to manage the relationships with athletes. And you must set expectations. You must set goals and performance goals and boundaries. And it's okay to hold those individuals accountable when they don't perform. But I feel that in this day and age, we've gone so far in one way that every coach that I work with feels so vulnerable and is afraid to speak up and set those expectations for fear that they will file, so that the person that they're setting the expectations with will file a safe sport complaint or something related to that. And I'm here today to tell you that that is not the case, that we are here to support you. And really, the work that I'm here to do is to help empower the athlete voice or the coach voice. So some quick stats, because, I'm very deep into this presentation and I've got to get into more information for you. So based on the most recent Ontario Coaches Report, 9 in 10, I want to talk specifically, about hazing. And again, many of you are like, oh, that's an old school practice. It doesn't happen. It is happening more than any of us ever expected based on the emerging data from the Coaches Association of Ontario. So 9 in 10 coaches believe that hazing is a serious issue. We all understand that it's not acceptable and not a behavior that we should be engaging. However, 4 in 10 coaches in Ontario are aware of hazing within their organization or club. And again, going back to the comment that I made about the normalized behavior, 6 in 10 coaches experience hazing personally as an athlete. I experienced hazing personally as an athlete. And at the time, it was an acceptable form of team bonding and team experience, right? And bringing that team together and breaking those athletes down to build them up as a team. That behavior is no longer acceptable in sport. And most coaches, sorry, my timing was a little bit off there, but most coaches, 86% of coaches in Ontario agree that hazing is a serious issue, but can't actually speak to what those behaviors are that we consider hazing. So let's dig into that a little bit. At a very high level, some hazing behaviors that are unacceptable at a very high level include physical tests, new members required to do labor for other senior members. And we see this all too often, and it's often seen as an innocent act, where a rookie or a new member of a team must do something for the senior member of the team, or they're subjected to some form of exercises, punishment, or punishment where they are yelled at, screamed, ridiculed, cursed at by others. In some cases, it's a simple act of giving them a nickname that often to the person receiving that could be demeaning. Wearing embarrassing clothing. This happens in swimming all of the time, where the males have to wear female bathing suits, right? We see these types of things and they're just entrenched in our sport. And all too often, we don't even think about the fact that the person receiving that behavior feels uncomfortable. And, or it could be something as simple as singing or chanting in public. And when you look at the stats around this, in some cases, the coaches might think that this behavior is being perceived as a positive behavior. A lower level or a lower number of coaches are engaging or know of someone that's engaging in this behavior at their club within, and that little asterisk there is within the past 2 years, or other coaches that, and again, the alarming number of us that have experienced this as athletes. So that's a low level. These are kind of the more harmless, perceived as harmless on the hazing scale, right? The more extreme are those acts where there is sexual or physical violence, where people are being asked to ingest substances or concoctions, right, that are not good, that are gross, right, or unacceptable. So there is a spectrum, and you've seen in Toronto, especially, in the past couple of years within the private school system or within the club environment, some criminal charges that have been placed on individuals that have engaged in these types of behaviors. So it's really important for you to know that these types of behaviors are still occurring at the local level. Now, the research does show that the older the age of the athletes, the more likely these types of behaviors are to occur. But we are seeing these types of behaviors occurring at still an alarming rate in Ontario. And so I just wanted to spend a bit of time to make you aware of, these behaviors are still occurring, and make you think about your own practices, your own experiences in sport, to say, hey, is this something that has happened to me throughout my career, my athletic career? Is this something that I'm seeing in my club? Because we're also seeing research to show that coaches aren't speaking up when they see these behaviors. So what is your club doing? And for those of you who are club leaders or have roles of influence within your clubs, do you have policies and regulations or statements around these behaviors and whether or not they are or are not acceptable within your club environment? Okay. And so, again, when we look at how often coaches are addressing hazing within the environment, we're seeing quite a range within coaches addressing behaviors when they occur, right? How many coaches are communicating acceptable and unacceptable behavior within athletes at the start of the season? Only 45% of coaches in this province are setting those expectations at the beginning of the season. Only 43% of those coaches are intervening when they witness a hazing practice taking place or hear of a hazing practice taking place. Only 40% of coaches are actually holding those individuals that are crossing those lines, either, at the extreme or the lower level types of hazing behaviors. Are they holding those individuals accountable, right? And so this is really where bystander awareness training and empowering voices within your team becomes critical to creating those optimal training environments. And the more that we speak up when these behaviors occur, the more we will model that behavior, the more we set the expectations within our environments about what acceptable and unacceptable behaviors look like, the more we break down those cultural conditionings and those normalized behaviors that have potentially been entrenched in our sport since the beginning of time. And I would think, rugby, my experience with rugby is there are a lot of really great rituals and experiences that happen within the sport. And there are also, in some environments, some very challenging behaviors that occur, right? That do and potential that either blatantly cross a line, like let's not dance around this, like that blatantly cross that line, or dance a very fine line between acceptable and unacceptable. And we need to know that as society and culture evolves and we become more inclusive and consider how Canadians are evolving, not only in terms of multiculturalism, but within creating safe and inclusive environments, that's the more work that we can do to create that environment. Here I go, sucking the fun or the perceived fun out of what everyone does. And that's not what I'm here to do. What I'm here to do is just get you to think about the practices that are happening at your club, on your team, in your environment, in your sport, that might cross that line, that might fit into one of those categories that we just talked about, right? And there are great ways to build a team. We don't want your teams to not have socials. We don't want your teams to not have fun. What we want, and what your role as a coach and a club leader is to do, is to really create environments where everyone can be their authentic self. And in order to create environments where everyone can be their authentic self, you actually have to understand who your athletes are and who makes up your team and what your community looks like and what those challenges are within the socioeconomic status of your community, and where we might see behaviors that are normalized within that society and that socioeconomic status, and where we see opportunities to correct behaviors and create environments that are safe, positive, and inclusive. So just some positive experiences that we can do as clubs. The next piece I want to talk about is exercise as punishment. And this is, again, continued practice across the entire sport system. There isn't a club or a sport that I haven't spoken to or experience. I have 2 kids that are teenagers that are multi-sport athletes, and we experience this every single day. And again, we coach how we were coached. So it's not that we are intentional in our in our practice to punish or to potentially cause harm to our athletes. We just don't know what we don't know. And again, I have this conversation with our tennis coaches all of the time because tennis is an individual sport. It's a high pressure sport. People have to perform as individuals in like the most challenging environments. And all too often in the past, exercise as punishment has been used to kind of build that muscle memory and help athletes react in those intense environments. And so when we talk about exercise as punishment, as I said off the beginning, it's no longer an acceptable form of coaching practice. And it really talks about, when we talk about punishment, we talk about it, we talk about the fact that the punishment piece interferes with the athlete development and their positive sense of self and relationship with others. And it really does encourage those individuals to drop out from our sports. And as I said at the beginning, that break athletes down to rebuild them in the mindset that we think is going to unlock their potential is an outdated form of practice. And so, sorry, just before I move to the next slide, and when we talk about exercise as punishment, right, this is very simple behaviors that are, suicides, having athletes run laps when they don't have performance. And today, like when we talk about Gen Z or Gen A athletes, I'll tell you something about them. They are savvy. They understand what you're doing. And it's not about commitment. It's just they won't show up. If I work with a team and they had a previous coach, and that coach, they knew when they didn't perform, they were going to run laps the next practice. And today's athlete just doesn't show up. They skip that practice. They don't respond to that. And again, it's not saying that you can't have conditioning. It's just understanding where your exercise is that reaction to a behavior that is not what you're looking to see versus exercise as building their anaerobic or aerobic capacity to perform better. Right. And so the easiest way to get you and to get your coaches thinking about this is, why am I making them run those laps? Why am I making them, do this exertion drill? Why am I making them whatever that punishment is? Why am I doing that? And if the motivator is because they're not doing what I say and I'm frustrated with them, you need to rethink how you're approaching that environment with those athletes. And again, I'm not saying that you can't hold your athletes accountable. I'm not saying that you can't condition them in terms of building their aerobic and their anaerobic capacity. I'm saying that the relationship between exercise and punishment has to change. And it's okay to have consequences when people don't perform. And again, using our tennis example, I use this all the time. Serving. Any of you that know tennis, serving is a high pressure, serving in a high pressure situation is a critical skill that our athletes need to develop at a very early age. And so we have to create high pressure environments where they feel uncomfortable, where they feel stress, where they feel anxiety, where they feel or where they fear failure. But what we have to do is create that environment where when we create that high pressure point or that high pressure situation, that athlete doesn't feel that their entire career is over if they don't make that point. That athlete doesn't fear that they're going to become injured because of the overexertion that they're going to have as a punishment for not performing. So it's a very fine line and a very thin balance, but what you need to know is the practice of making people run because you're frustrated with them is outdated and no longer an acceptable form of coaching. So some quick additional trends before we get to what are you going to do and how are we going to continue this conversation. A big one that we're seeing, and I referenced this a little bit earlier, is social media. And athlete to athlete abuse within social media is a huge issue, as is inappropriate cell phone use in locker rooms. So if your club or your team doesn't have a very high level social media policy, or doesn't, and your club has a change room that doesn't have a cell phone ban, that it goes beyond just sticking a piece of paper on your door that says no cell phones. You need to be aware that this is a huge issue that has the potential to get a club or a team in trouble. What we're seeing is the failure for clubs to address situations where group chats are created that are unmonitored. Just because it's unmonitored and your coach isn't on it or your administrator isn't on it doesn't mean, if it's founded within the team environment, there is a responsibility of the club to act on that. And the easiest way to make sure that you're supporting this or preventing this is to have rules within your club and have conversations and set expectations within your team to say, we do not condone the group chats outside of the team environment that doesn't have a parent and coaches on it. And when we talk about rule of two, and I talked about it very loosely, and I haven't spent a lot of time on it because I'm assuming that is an area where most of our coaches and club administrators have a strong understanding. Rule of two extends into the digital environment. So do not ever create an environment where your coaches or your athletes are alone one-to-one in a virtual environment without some form of parental control or chaperoning. And what we do is, and my best practice that I practice across every sport that I work with, is to ensure that players and parents are on those group chats in addition to the coaches. When we talk about inappropriate cell phone use, we're seeing more and more across all sports, situations where a minor takes what they think is a funny photo of another minor and shares it in a group chat, and without the permission and the consent of that individual. It sounds really innocent, but it can spiral very quickly and create a situation where your club has to respond or your team has to respond. So my best practice with all clubs is to ensure not only do you have the sign that says no cell phone use in your change rooms or in those designated spaces, but also have a conversation with your team, with your parents at your preseason meetings to set those expectations and be real. We don't do this because this is what happens and this is the outcome. We are seeing across lots of other sports or in our sport environment, people taking inappropriate photos and sharing them without consent. And if it crosses, into a scenario where pictures are being taken of someone in a vulnerable position, it can cross into criminal territory. And people need to understand that. And our athletes and all minors that you're working with, you have to have those conversations. We can't assume that they know that. They get this training in school, but we need to reinforce it in the sport environment. Again, difficult parents or guardians. I would say this is probably the number one area that I'm not spending enough time with on this webinar. But what you need to know as coaches and club leaders and anyone that's working in the sport environment is you have to set clear expectations of behaviors of not only your parents, but of your players and their guardians and their caregivers. And you have to hold those individuals accountable. And the easiest way to do that is to have a club code of conduct that not only your coaches and your administrators and your players sign, but that your parents sign as well. And it doesn't have to be a 20-page document. It can be a simple value-based statement that everyone agrees to how they're going to behave, and when they don't behave that way, what that accountability looks like. And I know that Jocelyn is doing a lot of work, and Rugby Ontario and Rugby Canada is doing a lot of work on their toolkit and on their resources to help guide the sport environment, the rugby environment, to be able to have the tools to do this work. And I'll let Jocelyn jump in on that at the end when I'm finished. Or if you want to jump in now, do you want to talk about the work that you're doing, or
No, you
keep going? Okay, keep going. Okay, so how do we break this down in very easy ways? Number one, what can you do? Have policies. Make sure those policies identify your club values and set expectations, but bring it to life. Host preseason meetings. with your players, with your parents, with your staff, where you set the expectations and the goals for the season, where you talk about the consequences for underperformance, where you talk about the conversation, you have the conversation where you talk about, the expectations for attendance, for practice, for their level of commitment, both as players and as parents. Then revisit it mid-season. And again, I know that many of you are volunteers and the season goes by really quickly, but the more proactive you are to have these simple meetings, to have a touch base with your parents, to have a touch base with your players, to set expectations and revisit those expectations and talk about the policies and the accountabilities will serve you 10 times over. It's a small investment for a heck of a lot of work on the back end if you have to go through a complaint or you have to manage discipline or you have parents that cross the lines. Talk about your values and your club culture. Live it, embrace it, and talk about what it is that you're trying to build within your club. As a sports system, we have lost the public trust. 10 years ago, people talked about how every leader, CEO, world leader was an athlete, had been coached. And now all we focus on in the sport environment is all of those bad things that we're seeing on the front page of the paper. You have to make sure that you are rebuilding the public trust within your club environment so they understand why you're there, what you're doing, and what they're getting out of your programs. Values become the platforms for tough conversation. And this is what a colleague and a mentor always says to us in our environment. The more you have your values entrenched in the work that you're doing, it allows you to call out behaviors that go against those values. And again, there's a lot of work that we can do in that environment. And I know that the work that Rugby Ontario and Rugby Canada are doing to drive home value-based sport are critical to this work to create that optimal environment for everyone. So again, enforce your policies, have a plan, and ask for help. It's okay. You're going to get yourself in sticky situations when you're interpreting your policies for the first time. You're going to get, as a club, you're going to feel very vulnerable when you are looking at all of the resources that are available for you in the sport environment. The great news is you have great leaders within your sports system to help you interpret and help you to bring these policies and these practices to life. All you have to do is ask for that help. And right here, by attending this session or watching this session, you've done that. And so you've done the first step in creating that optimal training environment for everyone in your system. So again, could keep speaking for a ton of time. I'm definitely over and I'm really sorry. So I'm going to stop talking. Are there any questions? Did I miss anything? Is there anything else that I can provide? Jocelyn, John, anything I can do?
Nothing in the chat right now. So I'm going to give people a chance to think for a minute. But thank you so much, Jen. There's lots in there. I know people will be kind of filtering through, percolating some of that over the next few days, I'm sure. And as we said, the recording of this will be available, so you can always come back, rewatch, share it with others in your clubs and communities. I have one question for you before we kind of launch into our next part here. But you talked about sort of the athlete to athlete communication, right? That athlete only group chat that we know so many of the teams like to set up. What advice do you have for leaders, coaches, for preventing that from happening or like continuing to happen when you try
Yeah.
and shut it down, pop up another one, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about controlling what you can control. And by setting the expectations and managing and calling out the behaviors and the practices when you see them, you can establish the expectation alone. And we're never going to be able to create an environment where there isn't going to be group chats and they're not going to use Snapchat and all of those types of things. We know that. We have to be realistic here. But by having that conversation early and often with your players and your parents, it will make them think twice about the behaviors that occur within that group chat. And when you hear about situations where if someone comes to you and something has happened in a group chat that exists, It's about calling it out or calling it in and correcting that behavior quickly and early. And also about how you create that training environment and how people talk to each other on the field really translates into how they talk to each other in the online environment. And so when we see, at a practice or during a game or before or after a game, we see people speaking to each other in ways that contradicts the values of our club or within our team environment, we need to address it quickly because then it won't escalate, right? And what we see is when it doesn't happen on the field of play and we build respect within our training environments, they're less likely to cross that environment in the online environment. But when we don't address that, that's when the problems occur. And all too often we are afraid to speak up and call out that behavior for fear of other repercussions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank like bringing them on board with
Yeah.
the why
Yeah.
and how. And
Yeah. And the why is so important, right? Why are we here? What is our team? And get them involved. The best thing you can do is get them involved in setting those values. The more they are a part of it, as opposed to having expectations imposed on them, the more they're likely to buy in. And that's just a reflection of our Gen Z and Gen A athletes.
Yeah. Hey, Debbie, you've got your hand up. Go to you. Debbie?
Maybe you're on mute if your hand is up.
One.
Sorry.
No worries.
I can't figure out how to turn my camera on either.
Welcome
so
to
I
my world.
apologize.
So I hear
Oh my gosh. I'm not used to Zoom. Okay. I just had a question. I was wondering if you have some examples you could share on so you're talking about addressing the behaviors, and I'm just wondering if you have some examples on what could be done discipline wise. Like my team is planning on doing a code of conduct, but I'm just wondering if there are some examples that you've seen that are really effective.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are great codes of conduct, and I know within the Rugby Canada Safe Sport package, there's a number of resources that you can pull from. But for me, it's about understanding, and again, the best example is just to set those expectations early. And so with your team, talk to them about what unlocks an optimal environment. So have the conversation with your players around like when do you perform well? What does that feel like? What are your teammates doing? What are your coaches doing? Right? And have them set those behaviors. And I feel I perform well when my teammates are cheering for me or the reinforcement is positive. And then ask them what it feels like when, you know, someone challenges them on the field in a way that criticizes them, right, and breaks them down versus builds them up. Talk to them about how they want to be motivated, what motivates you. And the more you engage them, and again, this is really a something that we see with Generation Z and Generation A alpha athletes, which would be the group of athletes that we're now coaching, is when someone is negative to them, it erodes their core values, right? And it erodes their confidence in a way that none of us as Generation X or Y or older people ever experience, right? We would just shake it off, and they internalize more than anyone has ever internalized. So if we take the time to understand, how they like to receive feedback. And we do this work with our athletes as young as like when they come into our prospect area. So we have athletes that could be 10, 11, 12 that are starting to show potential. And we start with communication exercises and in a positive environment. We have them identify how they receive feedback when they're feeling really good about their performance and how they like to receive feedback when their coach has some constructive criticism for them. And we start to do that when they feel good about themselves and understand how they like to receive that feedback, so that when the environment is challenging, we know how to speak with those athletes and get everyone on board. And so I think it's a conversation, and the more you engage this generation of athletes in that, the better the outcomes will be, and the more accountable they'll hold each other to. Right. And so when they all agree and they see, and people express their vulnerability around like I'm super sensitive or whatever it is, they will respect that more than we ever would when we were growing up, quite honestly. Is that helpful?
Awesome. All right. Well, if you've got more questions for Jen, we can come back to that, but we have something new that we're adding to the series this year. So we're doing a bit of a club show and tell almost. So we're inviting some club reps to share a little bit about their kind of unique programming or initiatives, trying to encourage some more sharing of best practices amongst our club community. So kicking it off for us tonight, we have Andrew Mackey from Guelph RFC. He's going to talk a little bit about their unique mixed ability program that they run and their collaboration with Waterloo County on that. So Andrew, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jen, for that. I appreciate everything you said, and I can definitely relate to a lot of what you said. I've been part of the rugby community since 1996. So I could definitely speak to a lot of the culture changes that have happened over the last 30 years. So yeah, I'm not quite as polished a presenter as Jen was. So I'm basically just going to speak to, the program that we run, which is our mixed abilities program. We're going into our 4th season this year. And yeah, I think the reason Jocelyn asked myself and Nyla from Waterloo Rugby to be a part of this is because we do it a little bit differently, I think, than a lot of the other clubs. And I think the biggest difference, at least from my experience speaking to other mixed ability facilitators and coaches, is that I invite families and children to participate with us. Whereas I think there's quite a few programs that are 16 and older. Correct, Jocelyn? Yeah. So, the genesis of this is like I have a son with an intellectual disability. I've been part of Guelph Rugby since our inaugural 2012 season. I've coached the junior program, the minis program. Like I was the original minis coach here. Yeah, as I said, I started in high school in '96. I've been an OUA athlete at U of G. I've benefited from good coaching, bad coaching, and everything in between. I've also had the extreme benefit of great mentors in our program, Corey Hector, Gary Robin, Daryl Devine, like all high level and highly respected coaches. And so I've seen myself go from a disciplinarian, like I was coached at the outset, to where I am now, where it's positive, and that's really the message that we're bringing. And I think the question I field the most from other rugby people is how do we bring children into it? I'm 6'1", 230 pounds. We have a few other big athletes that are playing with us, and we also have a 5-year-old on the field. And how does that work? And I think, at least for me, I don't have a set expectation of how it's going to work. Right? We have a framework of what mixed ability rugby is. So it's empowering athletes with intellectual and physical differences, returning players, and players brand new to the sport that are interested. And if you've been in a club environment, it's intimidating to just jump right into this sport. It's a physical sport. You're not sure where to be, where to go, all of these different things. And so if this program could be a springboard into those programs, great. If if this is just what you want to do, great. But what I've found, and I'll get to where Waterloo ties into this, is that by allowing children to participate, mine included, it brings parents into it on a level that you can't get that anywhere else that I've seen. So we have parents and their children playing on the field at the same time. So whether that's a senior player bringing out their children, or whether that is a minis athlete bringing out their parent or parents, or somebody that in their life that they want to include, that's the feedback I'm getting. That's where this program's working. And so Nyla Joseph from Waterloo Rugby was part of my initial group in 2001, I'll say. And the very next year, she's like, this is great. I'm going to go start this at Waterloo Rugby. And what we've evolved to is, I think, because we are a bit further away than some of the Toronto-based, GTA-based clubs. Like we're not out in the boonies, but it takes a bit more effort and commitment to go to what, maybe a Fletcher's or further. We didn't have quite the buy-in to get to the Mixed Ability Cup in the first 2 years. So what we decided to do was kind of have an inter-club competition, not even, more just a festival where we invited them to come to us and we would go to them. And we did that once each in 2023. And this year that evolved to every other weekend. We're either hosting them or traveling to Waterloo. And then the plan was to do that and then combine our efforts to then go to the Mixed Ability Cup, which is where I met Jocelyn, and we had a great time. And you could see the program kind of working the way I envision it. I don't have the intentions that some of the clubs do to create a contact mixed ability team. I want to create an environment where athletes that may not otherwise have the ability or capability to participate in, I guess, what you would call our mainstream level, to be able to do that, right? And feel included, because I think in all sports, but in I can only speak to rugby at this point. The community is really what separates us, right? That the friendships that are made, the inclusion that you get from just being around other people, right? And so you don't want to exclude anybody from that aspect, right? There are other sports that you can go and participate in, maybe, but if rugby is what you're looking for, then we can create an environment that can kind of host anybody, right? All shapes and sizes, all ages, everything, right? So really that's the difference in our program at this point. And what we're actually, I'm in talks right now with Fergus Rugby to add a third leg to this system. I actually live closer to Fergus, and I'm probably going to go transfer to play with their old boys team. So yeah, I've had some initial talks of adding that. So yeah, really, that's it. That's what's different. I think another interesting thing that happened was when we created the program that first year, there's a lot of people that came out that nobody really knew what we were going to do, including myself, and what it was going to look like. And there were some athletes that had more experience than others that they weren't it wasn't scratching an itch for them. So rather than cater to them, I created another program. I created an adult flag program that we just separated things. Or if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for a, 21-year-old plus fast flag program, go do that, right? If we're going to just stick within the mixed ability sphere, that's this night, right? And you would have crossover. I went to both. I facilitated both, and then I handed it off to somebody else for time reasons. Yeah, that eventually turned into just like a touch night, which is still growing. So, you can, for me, it's like the lack of expectations. I'm not very rigid about what we're going to do. It's athlete led with the mixed ability program. I start most nights saying, okay, here's what I have in my head. Does anybody have an idea of like, is there a skill that you want to work on? I've had some athletes that have gone from the mixed ability program to the contact program almost immediately. We had an athlete that joined us from a group home, never played rugby before, did the program through the summer, and was playing sevens in the fall. And like that's really what I had set out to do at the beginning, but it's grown into so much more than that. But yeah, I think the ability to bring parents into it is really the core of what we're doing at Guelph and in Waterloo. And so I think that's really the difference maker out here. That's really all I got.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. We had just one question from Chris around how many weeks do clubs offer mixed ability programming? So I've answered in the chat that it really does depend on the club, generally to other summer programs, but I don't know if you want to speak to that
Sure.
for you.
Yeah. It comes to insurance, I think is, we get back into that administrative side. You can run a 12-week program, right, for a certain cost. That's, I'm going to throw it like $75. I think you can run that. But what that
the
doesn't,
insurance, the
yes,
non-club is like $25. So
right.
then anything the club adds, yeah.
Yeah. And if you're going to try to pay for the cost of the flags, and I know we're going to move away from that into T1 and different things, but what that doesn't allow you to do is travel to another club. So in order to do what we're doing, there is a second tier, and I can't remember the terminology. I leave that to our secretary at the club, but it does cost a little bit more because the insurance goes up. And I haven't had any negative feedback when we did go up, because it comes with an explanation. And as long as you can provide an explanation and some education as to why this is going to cost a little bit more, you get the buy-in.
And that bump up also it doesn't restrict you in time. So the 12-week program that's cheap obviously can only happen for 12 weeks, although you could run multiple 12-week programs. But yeah, if you want to be able to compete against other clubs, travel, like you said, then you've got to look at the year long, but then your players are insured for the year. So you have full flexibility to answer Chris's question, whether you want to run it for 16 weeks in the summer or for 8 weeks in the fall or for, a section in the winter as a pre-season or off-season kind of thing. It's really up to the club. But our main mixed ability competitions happen at sort of the end of the summer, similar to our other programming.
Yeah, and I will say that's if you are signing up as strictly a mixed ability participant. If you are already a age grade or senior member, you can still you can come without any additional cost. And so I broadcast to our club every year, come out. It's non-committal, right? And that's the same with all of our athletes. It's non-committal. It's supposed to be fun. I'm not a disciplinarian or authoritarian. It's if you want to take a break and get some water, off you go. You don't need to ask. And I think that's the environment we're trying to get.
Mhm. Well, if anyone else has any questions, throw them in the chat now. But otherwise, sort of the last question maybe that we'll end with for both Jen and Andrew is, if you were to give a club who's looking to, in Andrew's case, maybe get started with something similar, or in Jen's case, kind of like first step they could take in this safe sport journey and making an improvement, what do you think is sort of the best advice or the best first step you would take if you were a club member listening to this?
Jen, do you want to go, or do you want me to just?
You go first.
uh,
Because you were very eloquent.
oh, thank you. I appreciate it. There's so many things that come to mind. I mean, there's a lot of stakeholders involved with a mixed ability program. So your first step would be Mixed Ability Sport Canada, and just go to their website and see what it's all about. Make sure that you are going to equip yourself to be able to ask the right questions, and then you'd be going to Jocelyn and sending an email that way, and seeing what kind of help you can get from both of those places. And then you're going to have a direct conversation with your club as to what you need, right? We started out as a flag program. We're moving to T1 touch. So equipment restrictions are going to be less. And yeah, as long as you have one committed person to spend some time, and a rugby ball, preferably more than one, you can get it started. Yeah.
Just takes one. Yeah, I think building on that. Oh, I think there was a question in the chat. What's T1 touch? Is that what the question was?
That's a great question. I was just introduced to it in August at the All In Cup. I did hear about it, maybe June, July. It's a variation of touch, and I think the best thing I could say to you is to go on YouTube and have a look at what it is. It's great because it is more of a simulation of a contact game. So it includes, some lineouts, or a variation of lineouts. It's if you have experience in rugby and you watch it, you'll see, oh yeah, that makes more sense. It's going to be a learning curve for everybody involved, but it's pretty cool. They're doing it in the UK, and it seems to be working. So yeah, I would say go on YouTube and check it out. It's just a variation of the touch that everybody, I assume everybody that's played rugby, you'll see it.
Yeah, I'll throw a link in the chat here. It's a World Rugby, like their new non-contact version of the game. And it is similar probably to the touch or flag rugby that you've played before. It can be played touch or flag too. Up to you or up to the competition that you're playing it in. But it's meant to look and feel a little bit more like rugby union instead of rugby league, with this idea of the scrum, the ruck, the line out, sort of the shapes of the game that we're used to, but without the contact. Yeah, great question. Jen, we'll pass it back over to you.
I'm struggling because the policy person in me is like, you got to have a policy, and you've got to have that foundation and that accountability, and everything I do is, in order to hold people accountable, you have to have that policy that everyone understands and read actually reads and consents to. So I think that's number one. And then number two, it's about how do you bring it to life, and it's not about sitting people down and having a seminar about everything. It's having those conversations that, you know, might feel tough at first to set those expectations. And it comes back to what I said at the very start. When you can build environments that are based on trust, transparency, and communication, you're going to create it naturally. The byproduct of that is the environment that we're all trying to create, which is safe, positive, and inclusive. So that's what I would say.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, both of you. I'll close us out here. Just before we go, thank you again, both Jen and Andrew, for taking the time for joining us. Remember that we are recording this, so you'll have the time to go back and rewatch, share with anyone else. I hope you've all been able to take something away and something back to your clubs, feel a little more confident and inspired to try some new programming or bring something new to improve your practices at your club. Watch over the next few days for the announcements for our third session, looking at 1 month from now on March 24th. So some more details will be coming out about that shortly. The recording for this will be available through the virtual portal that hopefully you've accessed this through. You have a link in your email as well. But then it'll also eventually live on our YouTube channel. So you'll have access to that continued, and anyone else will be able to access it as well. Last piece is to help us with our future initiatives, planning for future sessions. I'm going to just throw our survey here in the chat, and I would love for you to take a moment to fill that out for us, so that we can get some feedback and continue to put on some great sessions here. So link for you in the chat. Please take a moment to fill that out, whether you're watching this live or on the recording. We'll make sure that's available as well. And with that, I hope you all have a really lovely Monday evening. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.